The neighborhood of Oak Creek Estates was the kind of place where silence itself seemed manicured, where the air always carried the crisp tang of freshly cut grass, where rows of iron gates and flawless hedges promised a world insulated from chaos, danger, and ugliness. But on that afternoon when the sun hung heavy over the brick colonials and the lawns shimmered under heat, that illusion of safety cracked like thin glass under a hammer, because Anthony Carter, a man who had spent more than 30 years building a career that had taken him from the grit of undercover investigations to the sterile, marble halls of Washington's corridors of power, was unloading the weight of his past into the driveway of his new home, carrying boxes labeled Maya's Memories, filled with kindergarten handprints and photo albums, thinking this moment symbolized a new chapter, a chance for his daughter to ride her bike without fear and his wife to tend roses in peace. And yet as he lifted that box, the rumble of a police cruiser intruded, a sound low, predatory, and deliberate, and when the white and blue car slowed to a crawl in front of the house, Anthony felt that trained instinctive chill run through him, the kind that warned a storm was about to break, because the officer inside wasn't curious or neighborly, he was hunting, and when the engine idled and the driver's window rolled down, the man revealed himself as Mark Doyle, a Fairfax County officer with a crew cut, a thick neck, pale blue eyes, and the unmistakable posture of someone who had decided long before arriving that control belonged to him. And in his mind Oak Creek was his neighborhood, his patrol, his kingdom, and a black man unloading boxes in a luxury SUV outside the old Henderson house did not fit the picture. It was a glitch in the order, a detail that his prejudice told him needed to be corrected, and with his hand casually resting on the butt of his Glock, he called out "Afternoon," in a tone that was not greeting but challenge, and Anthony, setting the box down with care, gave a nod, his composure absolute, because 30 years of surviving dangerous situations had taught him to master the mask of calm. But Doyle killed the engine and stepped out, heavy boots crunching gravel, every step a calculated display of power, and what began as tension quickly hardened into confrontation, as Doyle asked if Anthony had just moved in. His tone sharp, probing, more interrogation than conversation, and when Anthony answered simply, the officer's eyes scanned him like a suspect, calculating the car, the house, the build, the skin color, and the pieces did not add up in Doyle's prejudice-laced arithmetic. So when he demanded identification under the false pretext of neighborhood break-ins, Anthony replied with legal clarity that on his property, without cause, he was under no obligation to provide ID, and though the words were calm, firm, rooted in the law itself, Doyle did not hear law. He heard defiance. He heard a black man telling him no, and the word no to Doyle was gasoline to fire, and the air between them thickened as neighbors' lawnmowers fell silent. Birds stopped singing, and only the sound of breathing remained, and Anthony felt the moment teetering on a knife's edge, knowing he could escalate by handing over his license, swallowing the small humiliation, letting it pass for the sake of peace. But inside him a father, a husband, a man of principle refused to surrender dignity on his own driveway in front of his daughter, and when he said firmly, "With all due respect, officer, you have no probable cause," and turned his back, Doyle snapped, because for him this was no longer about law, it was about dominance, and rage consumed his face as he advanced, snarling, "You don't turn your back on me?" Standing so close Anthony could smell stale coffee and sweat, and from the doorway Sarah appeared, voice trembling, begging him to just show ID, her eyes wide with terror, because she knew that ego in uniform was as dangerous as any weapon, and Doyle, misinterpreting Anthony's glance at his wife's weakness, spat venomous words like "good boy," designed to humiliate, but Anthony's simple shake of the head, his refusal, was a strike heavier than any punch, and Doyle, chest heaving, drew his baton with a shing of expanding steel, the sound slicing the suburban air like the opening note of violence, and Sarah gasped, shouting for him to stop, but Doyle, eyes gleaming with ugly triumph, smashed the baton into the car window. The explosion of glass, a sound that froze the entire street, shards spiderwebbing into crystalline fractures, raining onto leather seats, and in that silence Anthony saw his daughter Maya at the garage, hand over her mouth, eyes wide, innocence, shat, forever, and fury broke free inside him, not as wild anger but as diamond-hard resolve. Because Doyle had dragged terror into the sanctuary Anthony had fought his whole life to build, and within seconds neighbors stepped out, phones raised, cameras rolling, capturing not just a scene but history, and Doyle puffed out his chest, shouting scripted accusations of obstruction and resistance. His baton now a stage prop, his voice performing for the audience, but Anthony's attention was on his crying daughter, on his trembling wife, and his words, "You are done," were calm but lethal, ignored by Doyle, who laughed, threatened arrest, lunged with handcuffs, grabbing Anthony's arm, trying to force submission. And though Anthony could have broken free, trained as he was, he resisted only passively, refusing to give Doyle the excuse for violence. But as Doyle wrestled, red-faced, desperate, neighbors filming every moment, Sarah screamed, "Get your hands off my husband." Her voice like a blade, cutting through the tension, and Doyle, unhinged, threatened her too, crossing every line, every limit, his ego unraveling into raw danger, until Anthony made the decision that shifted everything. No more de-escalation, no more patience. It was time to reveal the truth, and as Doyle gripped his wrist, Anthony calmly reached into his jacket, and Doyle's eyes widened, fearing a weapon. But instead Anthony flipped open a black leather wallet, holding inches from Doyle's face the golden shield of Federal Authority. The eagle spread, the letters clear, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and above them the title Director. And for a heartbeat the world itself seemed to stop, Doyle's arrogance draining into pale terror, his hands trembling, cuffs falling to the driveway with a metallic clatter that sounded like a death knell. And neighbors gasped as the balance of power shifted in an instant, the bully exposed before the cameras as a trembling child, stammering denial, accusing Anthony of impersonation. But when his eyes caught the credential beside the badge, the photo, the name, Anthony M. Carter, Director, FBI, his knees nearly buckled, and with that one silent reveal, Doyle's career, his arrogance, his illusion of power disintegrated, leaving only fear, because he had not just assaulted a man. He had assaulted the head of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country, and as Anthony closed the wallet, his voice final as a gavel, "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." Neighbors filming captured the transformation, the shift of power more tangible than weather changing, Doyle fumbling for his radio, voice squeaking for a supervisor, his hands shaking uncontrollably, while Anthony, calm, collected, lifted the box of memories again, telling Sarah to come inside, treating Doyle as invisible, because this was no longer between men. This was between systems, and sirens wailed in the distance, racing toward a career already dead, and within hours the footage spread across social media, news outlets looping the moment of glass shattering and badge revealing, a perfect narrative of prejudice, abuse, and reckoning, sparking outrage nationwide, forcing Fairfax County Police into immediate suspension, then termination, and within days federal charges followed, and Mark Doyle, once the self-styled guardian of Oak Creek, found himself in handcuffs for real, indicted and convicted, sentenced to years in prison, paying restitution for damages and trauma, while Anthony Carter, against his will but by duty, stood at the FBI podium, addressing the nation not just as a father but as a leader, explaining how implicit bias had weaponized a quiet driveway into a battlefield. How millions faced the same terror without a badge to protect them, announcing reforms, accountability, task forces, and as his words echoed through the country, Oak Creek itself became a symbol, the shattered glass of one car window reflecting cracks in an entire system. And though Sarah later asked if change was possible, Anthony, watching Maya laugh again as she rode her bike, whispered that he had to believe it, because though